Greetings. Today is Friday, February the 23rd, 2024. This is the Daily Article Podcast. Today's article is written by Dr. Ryan Denison and narrated by Chris Elkins of the Denison Forum. In the aftermath of Alexei Navalny's death last Friday, much of the focus has, understandably, been on his attempts to combat corruption in the Russian government and the role Vladimir Putin likely played in his demise. Yet, as Russell Moore recently described, Navalny's final years were defined as much by his faith as by his politics or his time in prison. And that faith, in turn, motivated a great deal of how he chose to approach the persecution that ended his life at the age of 47. You see, Navalny came to faith late in life. And while he hasn't gone into detail on that process, the general belief is that it happened in the aftermath of Putin's previous attempt to kill him in 2020. As he told a court the following year, quote, "The fact is that I'm a Christian, which usually rather sets me up as an example for constant ridicule in the Anti-Corruption Foundation, because mostly our people are atheists, and I was once quite a militant atheist myself," end quote. He then went on to explain how his faith gave clarity and focus to his life as his circumstances became progressively grim. As Russell Moore concludes, this was the root, I believe, of Navalny's moral courage, his willingness to stand alone, his willingness to die. And while we may not be facing the prospect of imminent death or being banished to the gulags, living out our faith well still requires the moral courage to stand against the culture when the culture stands against God. However, the manner in which we take that stand is just as important as our willingness to take it. In a fascinating article, Alan Jacobs recently outlined one of the most essential truths to understanding our culture. He wrote of how many Americans don't seem all that interested in data or understanding opposing views. Rather, quote, "What many people want, what they earnestly and passionately desire, is to hate their enemies," end quote. As he goes on to describe, many of the problems that our society faces stem from this basic tendency to organize our ideas around what we hate rather than what we love. And the reason is that, as Jacob puts it, hatred alone is immortal. Even if we've gotten better at not acting on it over the years, which for the most part we have, people still seem hardwired to hate. And as such, hatred has become a virtue so long as it's directed towards the right people or ideas. Jacob's solution is to figure out, quote, "What pleasure, what gratification can we offer to people that exceeds the pleasure of hating," end quote. And really, from a secular point of view, that's about the best alternative our culture can offer. Human nature will always gravitate toward hate as the most powerful and, in a twisted way, righteous emotion. Christ, however, calls us to something better. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus states in Matthew 5:43 and 44, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Our task as Christians is to choose Christ's approach over the culturally permissible path of seeing hatred as a virtue so long as it's directed at the right people or ideas. That path of hatred can never lead to peace because peace is not its goal. The goal is to placate the innate desire to be the protagonist of your own story, and that's easier to accomplish by dragging others beneath you than it is by raising yourself up. And Jesus understood that about us. Perhaps it's why he finishes that command in Matthew 5:48 by calling us to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. As long as God is the standard by which our actions are judged, hate will never accomplish for us what the culture hopes it will accomplish for them. Unfortunately, that hasn't stopped many Christians from trying. If we want to get back to being the salt and light that Christ calls us to be, we need to do some serious reflecting on how we approach the culture around us. The old cliche of hate the sin and love the sinner has some truth to it, but it still tempts us to focus more on what we hate than on who we're called to love. That doesn't mean we ignore the sin that we see, but our job isn't to fix the culture. It's to help people encounter Jesus. After all, lost people are going to act like lost people, so we shouldn't expect Christ to change our culture without first changing the people in it. So where is your focus today? On what you hate or on whom you're called to love? The decision is likely to determine a great deal about not only the quality of your life, but also the quality of your witness. Choose wisely. The Denison Forum team is grateful for our daily article podcast subscribers. Please share the podcast with others. And for more news discerned differently, visit denisonforum.org.